So Dr. James Bannock is an APSRC doctoral prize fellow in the Department of Chemistry at Imperial College London. His research focused on developing automated optimizing flow reactors for the preparation of electronic materials with user-defined properties. And he got very recently his PhD in 2015. During his PhD, he pioneered scalable droplet flow reactors for production of superconducting polymers and applications to organic electronics. And James will talk today about the controlled synthesis of semiconducting polymers in droplet flow microreactors, and I guess it's related to the previous talk. And we're looking forward to see what you have done.
Okay, thank you, Stelios. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you to Bjorn and everyone at COREM for the invitation to talk here today. So I'm going to continue on a little bit from what John's been talking about in terms of flow chemistry. I'm going to talk specifically about synthesizing semiconducting polymers. So to start with, we've got a nice little video of our droplet flow synthesis of P3HT happening here, and this is the majority of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So initially, I'd just like to acknowledge everyone that's been involved. So John and Martin Heaney at Imperial College instigated this work and have supervised it, and some other people that have been involved at various stages are Siva, Kirsty, Neil and Wenman is doing a lot of the polymer work at the moment, and some of her stuff is in this talk today. So I'm going to talk predominantly about P3HT. So Hugo touched on it earlier. It's one of the original semiconducting polymers for organic photovoltaics. It's a simple thiophene polymer with a derivative at the 3 position to make it soluble. The reason we want to look at this is it's a very good test system for semiconducting polymers and making polymers in flow in general, but also it still gives good electronic performance. And one of the nice things is, due to the reaction chemistry, which I'll go on to talk about, it gives very good control of the molecular weight, or in flow we're able to control this very well. Importantly, it's cheap to produce and inherently scalable in flow. So by cheap, we're looking at $5, less than $5 a gram, which is important for OPV. And increasingly, we're finding people in the bio field looking to use semiconducting polymers for a range of bioengineering applications, and P3HT is one of the materials which appears to be working okay. So to start with, just to go over the synthesis, we take a dibrominated monomer. Now we buy this in bulk from China in the kilogram quantities, and it's very cheap to buy. And for us, it's a 2-step reaction. So we add a Grignard reagent to activate the thiophene. It produces a mixture of isomers. We have an 80% majority of this isomer, which when a nickel catalyst is added, we get the polymer P3HT, and this 20% sits in the reaction flask and under normal conditions doesn't react. Translating this to a flow system, why do we want to use flow? So small scale flasks at low temperatures work really nicely for semiconducting polymers, and you can go up to a few grams scale in a flask with no problem. But when you really want to scale up semiconducting polymer synthesis, you need to be able to produce kilogram quantities, and as the size of the flasks increases, you start to lose control of the temperature and mass transfer, which leads to increases in the polydispersity of the polymer, so the chain length distribution increases, and generally speaking the reproducibility of the polymer becomes a bit more problematic with scale. So what we've done is develop flow systems. So the most simple flow system is to take 2 tubes, put them into a mixer, and let the 2 things react. So in this case, the red could be our monomer, and the blue could be our catalyst. We mix them together, we get polymerization, but when you do this in flow, and it's a particular problem of polymers, what you find is that as the polymer grows, the solubility of that polymer in the solvent decreases, which causes gelation and fouling on the side of the reactor wall, and then after a few minutes, maybe an hour if you're lucky, the reactor will foul up and then it will no longer be useful to you. Also, as that reactor is fouling up, the properties of the reactor itself, so the volume of the reactor is changing. It's ever decreasing in volume, and so your reaction environment is no longer stable. So the way to get around this, the way we developed, was to incorporate a fluorinated oil. So this is a perfluorinated polyether that we inject in alongside our 2 reagents. and this causes the formation of droplets. So again, we're using 1mm channels for all our reactors, and so these droplets are relatively large, so 2 to 3 microliters in size, but we can produce droplet streams that are stable for meters on end in these channels. And so all the work that we do is with PTFE channels, so this matches up with the PFPE carrier oil that we use. So we get preferential wetting of the oil to the channel wall, and our droplets never touch the wall, and then they never foul, and our reactors can keep going indefinitely. So what does this actually look like? If we take our A and RB here it's just some dyes in solvent, and our carrier oil here again, it's PFPE. We see we're getting droplet generation at this point here, and that's going off down into a reactor where we would heat or do our other processes. And we can do this at various flow rates, different flow rate ratios, different combinations, whatever we need within reason. We can't go too extreme in offset ratios, but it's pretty tolerant to variation. And converting this to flow, what we need to do is take the thionyl grignards that you can make quite easily in batch here. There's no problem in doing the small molecule stuff in a flask. We take this and put it into a syringe here. We take our nickel catalyst and put that into a syringe. And so rather than using the normal catalyst for P3HT, we developed an in situ generated nickel catalyst for doing this, which gives the same level of control as the original catalyst developed for P3HT, except that it has a lot higher solubility, which allows us to control the molecular weight over a wide operating window. And so that's that. And then putting that all together, it looks a bit like that schematic at the start. We have our nickel catalyst solution, our PFPE, our thionyl grignard, which is that activated thiophene unit. That goes into a droplet generator, and then we heat the solution. And this is what it looks like. So it's nice to be able to do this on a nice big white screen. You see here the droplets come in as yellow, that's the monomer. As the droplets hit this center spiral here, they're hitting an oil bath where the reactor is heated, and they're going from yellow to orange and to red as the conjugation of the polymer builds up. And all we need to do after that is take the droplets out and precipitate them into acidified methanol to collect the product polymer. Now in terms of control, all we need to do to achieve molecular weight control here, owing to the chain growth nature of the synthesis, all we need to do is vary the ratio of the catalyst to the monomer, and we can do this by simply mixing the nickel catalyst solution with some just pure solvent to change the concentration of the overall nickel in the reaction. So we vary that over a 1 to 10 ratio, and we can build up a nice clean calibration for molecular weight as a function of nickel concentration going into our reactor. And what that allows us to do then is, for different people who have different requirements of different molecular weights, is go ahead and be able to use these flow reactors to produce exactly what people want. So it's the same idea that what John was saying in terms of self-optimizing reactors. We can use the flow chemistry here to predict what molecular weights are produced with a given nickel concentration. We can then go back, say for example you want a molecular weight of 35,000 kilodaltons. All you need to do then is put in a nickel concentration of 1.5 mol%, and you would get your product polymer. Taking this forward a little bit, so this is very recent stuff we've been doing, is going back and actually making the activated monomer in flow as well. And in doing this, what we've been able to do is really narrow down the polydispersities of these materials. So because we do our reactions at relatively high temperature, it tends to increase our polydispersity of the polymers that we produce. So at low temperature, it's quite easy to produce polydispersities of around 1.1 for these polymers. But in flow, typically before this, we've been getting 1.6, 1.7, stuff like that. But by getting this reaction right, and by getting the mixing right of the droplet generation, we can get our PDIs right down stably to PDIs of 1.1. And that's where the flow chemistry here optimizing in line with these three ratios, we can really get exactly what we need in to produce the polymers that we want. So with this, we actually have a handle on the PDI itself. So if we purposefully don't do what we want, we can increase the PDI. For certain applications, it may be desirable. And here, so long as the droplet generation, we want nice, clean, stable droplet flow that gives nice, fast mixing at the start, which ensures that we get a very uniform polymer at the end. And in terms of devices, one of the things that's quite important is the molecular weight influences how the polymer will perform in thin films. So just taking a very simple test, taking three polymers of different molecular weights, so here it's 34,000, 90,000 and 150,000 molecular weight. We make them up into solutions in xylene and just spin coat them at a fixed RPM. What we find is that as the molecular weight increases, so too does our absorbance of the film. And that can be a combination of different things that are going on there. So it can be a combination of the rheology of the solution. So high molecular weights tend to produce thicker solutions. It could also be changes in the actual extinction behavior of the polymer. But the point is that by changing the molecular weight, if you don't have a fixed molecular weight, what's going down onto your films is changing. So being able to produce very accurately controlled molecular weights of polymer is important for the final device applications. The second point that's important is the role of purity in these OPVs. So a lot of attention is paid on making new materials that perform very highly. However, one of the things that can really kill electronic devices is the impurities that are formed. So I don't want to go into too much detail into this scheme, but this shows you every single thing that happens in the reaction from going from the starting monomer to the polymer over here. But the key point is that for every 1 gram of the polymer that we make, there is a sum of 2.28 grams of impurities that can form. So the polymer is actually in the minority in a crude sample. A lot of the byproducts that form are liquids, so here the 2-bromopropane and the excess monomers that form over here, they can be removed very easily. But there are a lot of metal salts, so the magnesium salts from the Grignards, which, if not removed properly, can remain in the sample and can also act as nucleating sites when you're forming the electronic devices. Now the impact of this on device performance is quite profound. So if we take a crude sample of P3HT, so here we're using very high molecular weight P3HT, actually produced in a flask rather than in flow, but the principle still stands. If we measure the purity using XRF, in our crude sample we found that the purity was, detecting the sulfur, the purity was around 56% for the P3HT. We get a perfectly decent device of 2.4% efficiency. However, the current is a lot lower than what we would expect. So these devices are made using PCBM, so C60BM, PC60BM. So 2.4% is fairly low for these devices. However, when we purify the material properly using selective SOxyl extraction and go back and do our XRF again, we get our P3HT up to 99.9% pure as measured by XRF. Our current shoots up, nothing else in the device really changes in terms of the VOC. The fill factor increases, but the most profound change is the increase in current that occurs, which gives us an increase in efficiency up to 5%. And we're able to make very nice devices in that way. So there's a combination of things that are happening here. In flow, we're able to control the molecular weight very precisely for the application, but there are other external factors that still have a very strong influence on the electronic performance, and this is one of the things that we're looking to do in flow, is add the purification step in flow, and that's something that that's in development. If we take this forward a little bit and we change our acceptor material from the standard PC60BM fullerene acceptor, and we use a slightly better, more modern fullerene acceptor, ICBA, which has a higher LUMO. It gives us a higher open circuit voltage, and we were able to get some, peak efficiencies of 7% with ICBA with this high weight P3HT. One of the problems with making devices such as these is when we've made them using a spin coating isn't inherently scalable. It's not something that can be easily translated onto roll-to-roll processes, flexible substrates, that kind of thing. It requires high concentration, and ultimately you lose most of your material on the side of the spin coater as opposed to on your film. So one of the other things we looked at doing was spray coating, and we looked at doing this using non-chlorinated solvents. So in contrast to this case where we're using a high weight P3HT, here we found that actually we wanted to use a low weight P3HT because it gave us good solubility in O-xylene, which is the solvent which we used in this case. And just by changing the molecular weight to suit the application, we were able to achieve fairly decent P3HT, PC60BM devices from spray coating of 4%. The advantage with spray coating is you don't really get too much loss as long as you can control where your spray head is going. And because it's spray, you can, in principle, scale it. So going back to chemistry again, one of the things Bjorn talked about was combinatorial style chemistry. This is sort of going towards this kind of area. Here, what we were looking to do is create random copolymers of P3HT with the selenophene derivative of the thiophene. Selenophene has a lower band gap, so if we look at the two cases here, the polymer that's produced, the pure polymer that's produced here is dark red, whereas the P3HT is orange, and both of these are in chlorobenzene. And so by varying the ratio of the thiophene to the selenophene in the same reaction setup as we had previously, we're able to control the band gap between that of the two homopolymers. So by just simply controlling the ratio of these two, we can tune our optoelectronic properties of the polymer. Now it won't work in all cases because there's different chemistries that can be involved, but as long as they have the same functionality and react in the same way, you can just substitute different groups and do the chemistry in the same way. So that's the optical properties, and you can see that we have absorption, a peak absorption between that of the two homopolymers for the intermediate random copolymers that we produced. So more recently we've been looking at scalability and how we can actually do this on in large scales, and one of the nice things that we looked at was using green solvents. Now we looked at green solvents because we thought we could use something. THF is pretty expensive in terms of the energy consumed in making THF. So we thought if we tried to use a bio-derived derivative, which is 2-methyl THF, it might be quite a nice way to improve the green factor of this process. But actually what we found is one of the nice things, because it has a higher boiling point, we can actually increase the reaction temperature of our P3HT reaction, which allowed us to go 10 degrees higher. So normally we operate at 55 degrees, but here we did exactly the same thing, slightly different reactor configuration where we were using processed water rather than an oil bath. So we're pumping water around a circuit over our reactor as opposed to just dunking the tubing in oil. But by going 10 degrees higher to 65 degrees, we actually found that the reaction overall was 5 times faster. So normally our reactions were around 5 minutes, and here we were able to get full conversion from monomer to polymer in under a minute without really losing too much control over the, without losing any control over the molecular weight and the polydispersity of the polymer that we produced. And so in actually switching to a green solvent, we've been able to improve the productivity of our reactors because a 5-fold increase, a 5 times reduction in reaction time gives us a 5-fold increase in throughput in theory. And then to finish, this is some work we did actually quite a while ago with a OPV developer, which was to try and take this flow system all the way up to the kilogram per day scale so that you could actually use this as a manufacturing process to supply materials for large-scale OPV manufacturing. And so all we ended up doing, it was just as simple as increasing our flow rates of our nickel catalyst and our thionyl grignards. Here we were still making it in big batches because it was easier to do. But all we did was increase the volume of our reactor. So before they were around 1 milliliter, 2 milliliter reactors. Now we're going up to 24 milliliter reactors. We go a lot faster, but we're able to get production rates, measured production rates of over 1 kilo. And that was our target. We kind of went over it and then stopped. And that was we found that the reaction time in this case, we were able to get it down to 90 seconds. But again, the molecular weight and the polydispersity of the materials that we were producing were absolutely what we predicted from our calibrations. And so even from going from small scale flow systems to actually production ready systems, we don't have any loss of control. And in principle, it doesn't take too long to convert a small scale flow system to something that can make materials for real applications. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and invite any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. Questions? Please.
Yes, could you comment on the stability of the selenium-based polymers as opposed to the paraffin-based?
Do you mean stability of the actual end polymer materials?
Yeah.
That's something we didn't really look at, I have to be honest. We made them, characterised them, and that was it.
Because you see a lot of the paraffins, but you very seldom see the selenium.
Yeah, there's only a few published. There's only a few published reports of selenophene-based polymers. I don't know what the stability is like. Yeah,
They're fine.
Very nice, James. Have you guys ever tried to do, I can't imagine it working with conjugated polymers yet, but trying to use your carrier oil to have stuff in it, so you're sort of doing heterogeneous catalysis, which then you can imagine sort of recycling it, so have your catalyst forever living in the other bit, and then you filter not just your goodies.
So the initial method, before we came up with the soluble nickel catalyst, was to put the nickel chloride version of that catalyst in the oil, and then that would diffuse into the droplet. We have done other work, not with polymers, but where we have loaded the carrier oil with solids, so bases and things like that, to do that, exactly that, yeah. We haven't done the recycling bit though.
So everyone will talk about catalysts, but the whole point of the catalyst is you have to recycle it, right? And so nickel's probably more expensive than the monomer.
Not at the prices we're buying it at.
Yeah, have you considered doing in situ small and X-ray scattering, for example, on these reactions?
No, that's not something that we've looked at doing. So we've principally stuck to optical-based, so as John was showing, optical-based things and liquid chromatography. I think at one point there was some IR stuff, but that was quite a while ago.
But yeah, we're open to
Yeah.
we use techniques and we have experience of an access stream. Together what we're very willing to consider.
So I'm always curious about the logistics of these setups. So on this 1 kilogram scale, obviously you're not using a syringe pump, right?
We're using reciprocating pumps, so yeah, that's how we're.
So you have a reservoir of.
Yes, so we have a big tank that we're drawing everything up from. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
The 5% you got in efficiency with P3HT PCBM is quite high. So the thing is the purification you have made. So it's very, very pure, the P3HT.
It's a combination of it being pure, but also it's an optimized polymer fullerene system, which it was done by Neil Treat when he was in Natalie Stingling's group, and he really optimized that specific molecular weight of P3HT with those fullerenes, and I think that had a lot to do with the high numbers that came with the purification study.
Okay. And compared with the other production techniques, synthetic techniques you can find in P3HT, what is the advantage of your technique? I mean, can you summarize? Three ways, I think. There are two more ways to synthesize P3HT, right?
So there's direct arylation. You can do it using Stilly if you want, but you wouldn't want to be doing that at large scale. You can probably do it using Suzuki as well. I think the advantage with this is just the simplicity of the synthesis, because although there might be a few steps in doing the brominations, just using the Grignard reagent, which is just an off-the-shelf reagent, it's not that fussier reaction, and it does give you the very good control over the molecular weight owing to the synthesis. We're taking advantage of that linear relationship between molecular weight and the reciprocal of nickel concentration quite a lot. But you can do it in other ways. I just don't think it's as scalable. Okay.
Any more questions? Yes, please.
Yes, I wonder if there's any limitations regarding forming droplets versus cube DMA.
Versus what? Sorry.
Cube diamond.
Yeah.
Is there any borderlines there?
So
Can the cube be?
yeah, so we've tried going bigger to increase throughput. That didn't really work too well. Eventually, gravity does play a part. Right, if you go any bigger than 1 mil, gravity plays a part.
Any more questions? Okay, let's thank the speaker again.
Well,